What's the lesson here? In the 1930s, the gap between rich and poor was reduced because the government took from the rich to take care of the mass of people who had been suffering in unemployment and poverty through no fault of their own, through the breakdown of the system. No sooner was the war over than the business community and the rich went to work to undo what had happened in the 1930s, to undo the high taxes on corporations and bring them down to where I just told you they were, to undo the tax on wealthy people to bring them down to where they are today. And therein lies a lesson, that it was the upsurge of a militant, organized working class that overcame for a while the tendency of capitalism to polarize. But the lesson there was better learned by the business and the rich than by the working people. Because the business and the rich went to work. No sooner was the war over, they went to work to undo what had been done in the 1930s. The economic history of the United States in the last 30, 40, 50 years has been the undoing of the New Deal. That was the name Roosevelt gave to what he did in the 1930s. From which the following lesson can be further distilled. The problem for corporations and the rich, who keep running a system that plunges us into crisis after crisis, who have really no effective way to prevent them, who likewise tend to polarize into rich and poor. The problem for corporations and the rich is this. They've got an economic system that constantly provokes the mass of people into thinking that they might be able to use the political system to offset the effects of the economic system. The danger for capitalism has been, if you actually give everybody the vote, that the vote will be the way, the political way will be for the majority to recoup for themselves in politics what they lost in the capitalist economic system. That is a great fundamental danger for capitalism. And how has American capitalism, and that in other countries, dealt with this? And the answer is, you've got to control the politics. Because if you don't, it will come back and undo what you've achieved in your economic life. They learned that in the Great Depression by watching what the CIO and the socialists and the communists did. So in the last 50 years, the business community went to work. They destroyed the labor movement. They destroyed the socialist parties, and they destroyed the communist parties. I don't have the time to go into that, but read your history, you'll see it. In the private sector of the United States today, the official percentage of workers that are members of a union represented by a trade union is under 7%. 93% of private sector workers in the United States have no union. The notion of unions as a powerful social force requires a lack of understanding of what's going on in our society that boggles the mind. So what have we got? We've got all the mechanisms in place that allow the business community and the wealthy to control the politics. You all know these stories. They're the ones who fund the candidates. They're the ones who fund the parties. They're the ones who hire huge armies of lobbyists to work on an ongoing basis with whoever gets elected. And they fund all these think tanks that produce endless resources and reports and researchers and specialists for the radio and the television to shape the consciousness of what Americans see, hear, and think. And the end result are events sort of like the two political presidential conventions, in which not a word is said about the system, not a word is said of the sort I've just finished telling you about, in which they each blame each other as if the politicos had the power to do much about all of this. But there's no systemic analysis, no systemic recognition. What else about this system is bizarre? Well, one of the results of the shaping of consciousness is the following kind of really strange idea. It goes like this. If you give corporations a chance to make profits, then good things will happen. So, for example, we have to create a profitable business climate because then businesses, say by cutting their taxes or by deregulating them or by allowing them to do all kinds of things, then good things will happen to the rest of us. There's a simple logical problem here. If you cut the taxes of business, then they have more money because their taxes are lower. What they do with that money is their decision. And their decision is governed by making as much money as possible. That might mean that they will create a job, okay, but not here, in a place where the wages are much lower, say in Asia, which might be nice for them, but isn't particularly good here. Or they might lend it to a government, or they might play the stock market, or they might do, I don't know, let's see, what did they do over the last 30 years? The most impressive things big corporations did with the money they saved from taxes and with the profits they were able to get from deregulation, really one of the most spectacular things they did was to begin to pay corporate executives at the top stupefying amounts of money. We are the leader in the world. I'm sure you're all proud. We're the leader in the world in the gap between what we pay our top executives and what the average worker in that company that the executive is leading gets. In other places, the numbers are like 30, 40 times. In our country, it's 300 or 400 times. The big people at the top took the advantage of the lower taxes they had to pay to make themselves stupefyingly rich, which in a free enterprise, they're free to do. The notion that if you do something good for a corporation, they will in some sense pay you back is childish. That's not what they do. That's not what they're hired to do. In this system, they always try to pay fewer taxes. They always try to find the most profitable thing they can do with their money. What that does for the rest of us, who knows? But there's no control here. It's also like allowing a company to go and close a factory in Cincinnati and open it in Shanghai. The justification of the logic of the way our culture works is, well, we will all benefit because the prices that they will charge for the things they make over there will be less than what they... But they're not required to do that. When they close the factory here and go to China, it's precisely with the big idea of selling the good at the same price to you in the supermarket, but just having to pay lower wages to get it manufactured over there. Why should they lower the price? They'd make more money if they didn't. It's not their job, as they will explain to you, to take care of the American economy. They weren't hired by the American economy. They were hired by the shareholders of that company to make money for that company. Every technological breakthrough made by capitalism in the last 300 years has been justified by whoever was making it on the grounds that with this new machine or with this new process, human labor will be less drudgery. Machines will replace people. We will not have to work so hard and so long. How interesting. According to the OECD, Americans today, where we have the most advanced technological breakthroughs imaginable, Americans today do more hours of paid labor than any other working class in any country on the planet. Where was all the leisure supposed to come from? All the work that was saved. Less work for mom from all those appliances in the store. All that you could buy. Meanwhile, mom has to go out and work because the family can't survive unless she does. She's not doing less work. She now has two jobs, the one in the house and the one in the labor force. It's absurd. And by the way, that's not the fault of the technology, which really was liberating. But it's the fault of a system that has to keep making money, whether the technology is advanced or not, and drives people, because that's how it makes money. Last thing about this system, before I talk about a solution. Not only does it produce crises and a terrible waste and damage, not only does it polarize unless people react, and not only does it deny us the fruits of technical change, the fruits of all kinds of breakthroughs, but even more, what it does to us as individuals needs to be understood. And it's a perfect transition to what I think the solution is. Most production in the United States is done by large corporations. We are a society that celebrates small businesses. There's something very poignant about that. Small businesses, we are told, are the backbone of America. No, they're not. Big business is what runs this economy. Small business is a long, old story. Small business, we are told, creates 3 out of 4 jobs. Quite true. Small businesses also go out of business on a scale that is fantastic and loses 3 out of 4 jobs. See, that little detail is left out. Small business is a very hard thing to survive. And the reason is it's dependent on big business from whom it buys many of its basic needs, and they therefore control. Though the big businesses are where the work and the basic employment and production is done in the United States. And how does a big business work? It's a remarkable institution. A tiny number of people make all the decisions. Here's how it works. The group is called a major shareholders. The handful of people who have big blocks of stock. Because in a corporation, you get a vote for each share you own. It's not one person, one vote. It's how many shares you own. So, for example, if you own 1 million shares, you get 1 million votes. If your grandmother left you 2 shares, you get 2 votes. If your grandmother had no shares and you don't have any, you get no votes. So the major shareholders control the bulk of the decisions. And what's the most important decision they make? They select the people who run the corporation. They're called the board of directors, usually 15 or 20 people. And they make all the decisions. What to produce, how to produce, where to produce, and what to do with the profits. All the basic decisions. The vast majority of people come to work Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and they do what? They make whatever that board of directors decides that company's going to make. And they make it in whatever way, with whatever technology that board of directors decides, working on whatever raw materials that board of directors presents to those workers. And the board of directors decides whether the workers are here in the United States or over there in India or wherever. And when the work is done and there are some profits, the board of directors decides what's to do with it. For example, to pay the top executives spectacular salaries. That's a decision they make. Or to move production to another country, or to whatever, they make that. The vast mass of the workers, 1,000 in a small company, 100,000 in a big one. Or in the case of the really big ones, say Walmart, 1 million. 1 million people who come to work at Walmart. And a group of 10, 15 people. If you look at the board of directors, you'll see a stunning number of them have the name Walton. But even if you didn't pay attention to that, a tiny group of people. Now, for a country that defines itself as committed to democracy, there's something stunning here. Democracy means that if you're affected by a decision, you get to participate in it. The idea being, if a decision made by a mayor or a congressman or woman or a senator or a president is something that affects us, which it obviously does, then we all get to participate. Well, let's see. Where you work, what they make affects your life. How they make it with this chemical, or that affects your health, your life. Whether they do it here or they fire you and do it in another country, you bet that affects your life. So what exactly is your participation in the decisions you have to live with the results of? Answer, nothing. You come to work and you do what you're told. And at the end of the day, you've poured your brains and your muscles into making something, and you know what you're supposed to do. And you all know because we all go to the same schools. At the end of the day, you leave there whatever it is you helped to make, and you go home. And if you forget and try to take with you when you go home one of those things you helped to make, a few hours later there's a knock on the door, and people in dark blue uniforms hurt you. And take it back, because it's not yours. You made it. That's a very clear idea. You do not participate in controlling your own product. How do you square that with democracy? There is no way to do that. And so we conveniently, as a society, don't ask the question. Don't think about it. That's the success of the business community and the wealthy, who may want to make sure we don't think about it, because it is an impossible contradiction of the way we've organized things. And it has extraordinary effects. Everyone who goes to work for a corporation feels, on some level, consciously or unconsciously, their powerlessness, their irrelevance to the decisions that affect them, including whether they have the job next week or not. That inculcates in people a fatalism, a lack of care, a feeling of ripped-offness. I like to remind everybody that it's an interesting admission of that in our culture, because on the way home from almost every corporation, when the workers are finished with the day, they pass a bar or two, which invites them to come in after work to enjoy a happy hour, which is a very subtle way of reminding them what the quality is of the hours that precede arrival at the bar. Those are the unhappy hours. And they're unhappy because you are a drudge. You're a drone. You're almost like a piece of machinery. And so you don't care that much about your job. You're interested in how much it pays because your excitement is elsewhere. Maybe with what you can buy with the money you get from working. But the job itself, for most workers, is purely a means to get the money. And yet it's amazing if you think about it. 5 out of 7 days, for the major part of the day, you go to work. It's the most important part of your adult life. Why isn't it made to be a learning experience, a joyous experience, an experience that develops you and develops your potential and develops your understanding? It ought to be. But you accept, don't you? We all do. That it isn't. That all of that is subordinated to making money, and the people at the top think the best way to make money is to stick you in a little cubicle with a little computer and throw Muzak at you until you go crazy. That has very bad effects on human beings. And those are ramified in our culture.